I knew something was wrong the moment I heard the electric fence pop. Just a sharp crack in the darkness, followed by a scream so panicked it didn't sound human at first. And when I ran outside with a flashlight, heart pounding, I saw a shadow stumbling away from the property line like a terrified animal. But before I tell you who it was and why they were on my land at 5 a.m., you need to understand exactly how this entire HOA nightmare started. Because none of it happened overnight. It began with Margaret Dawson storming off my ranch last week after her illegal HOA community picnic blew up in her face, sending a swarm of trespassers scrambling across my driveway like ants escaping boiling water, leaving behind crushed juice boxes, overturned coolers, and lawn chairs that didn't even belong to them. And while I should have been furious, I felt something else. I felt the first spark of a war they didn't realize they'd ignited. That same night, after the picnic fiasco, I found a note taped to my gate. No envelope, no signature, just a typed message saying, "Your property has been reclassified under community zoning. Comply immediately." At first I laughed because who the hell reclassifies a private ranch without permission? But by the next morning, a cheap white sedan appeared on my driveway with two men wearing mismatched tactical boots, shiny fake badges, and uniforms that didn't belong to any agency I'd ever seen. They tried to puff their chests and tell me my fences were obstructions, that the HOA had historical jurisdiction, and that I was required to grant public access across my land. The second they mispronounced the county ordinance number, I knew they weren't real law enforcement. These were HOA goons playing dress-up, but they didn't expect me to stand there calmly, arms crossed, watching them sweat in the sun. One of them even tried flashing a laminated ID that still had the plastic corner sticking up like it had been printed 10 minutes earlier. But the real shock came when Margaret herself pulled up behind them, wearing sunglasses she didn't need, sipping iced tea like she was starring in her own reality show. She strutted toward me with this smug grin saying, "As HOA vice president, I'm authorized to enforce compliance." And that was the exact moment I realized she truly believed she had power over me, over my ranch, my land, my home, like some self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. And to be honest, that arrogance was the final push I needed. That night, I installed the electric perimeter fence. Nothing deadly, just strong enough to make trespassers rethink life choices. And I set up cameras across every corner of my property, ready for whatever stunt they tried next. What I didn't expect was for them to test the fence so soon. And definitely not for Margaret to be the very first person foolish enough to touch it. Because yes, when that scream tore through the dawn air, when I saw that shadow staggering backward in panic, when I replayed the footage and zoomed in on the figure gripping her arm, I realized the HOA had officially crossed the line. But they had also just given me undeniable proof that they were still sneaking onto my land. And it was time to strike back harder than they ever imagined. The moment I confirmed it was Margaret on the footage, her pastel cardigan glowing under the infrared light, her face twisted in a mix of shock, pain, and pure embarrassment, I knew the HOA wasn't going to admit what she'd done. People like her never accept responsibility. They twist the story until they're the victim, and sure enough, before I even had breakfast, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown HOA number claiming, "A dangerous electrical hazard on your property injured a community member this morning. Immediate corrective action required." The audacity almost made me drop my coffee. They were trespassing on my land at dawn, touching my fence like raccoons testing a trash can, and somehow I was the threat? That message alone told me the HOA wasn't retreating, they were escalating. But instead of getting angry, I felt strangely calm, like a storm settling into its shape before it hits. I spent the morning reviewing every second of footage. Margaret creeping toward the fence, looking around like she expected a secret entrance to magically open, pressing her hand against the wire for who knows what reason, then jolting back as if the fence slapped every ounce of arrogance out of her. She stumbled, flailed, and toppled sideways into a bush like a confused cartoon character. As funny as it was, it also confirmed something more dangerous. Margaret was desperate enough to violate trespassing laws again, even after being publicly humiliated during the picnic fiasco. And people like her don't act alone. They act under pressure. That afternoon, as I was walking down my gravel path toward the barn, I heard voices near the front gate. Not just one or two,
an entire cluster. When I stepped closer, I saw a small crowd forming. HOA board members, their spouses, two nosy neighbors, and even a local community liaison holding a clipboard like he was auditioning for a government job he didn't have. They whispered, pointed, and tilted their heads dramatically toward my ranch like they'd discovered an archaeological site. Then Margaret herself stepped forward, arm in a sling she absolutely didn't need, looking like she'd practiced her wounded expression in the mirror. "We need to have a discussion," she announced loudly, as if projecting to an imaginary TV audience. "Your fence is a threat to the safety of everyone in this community." I stared at her, stunned. Not because of her accusation, but because she said it with total sincerity, as if trespassing at 5 in the morning was a normal neighborhood activity. One of the board members, a wiry man with a comb-over held together by pure hope, added, "We've received reports that your ranch is violating community guidelines." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny, I'm not part of your community." They exchanged glances, obviously rehearsed, and began flipping through printed papers, maps, diagrams, fake zoning outlines, all covered in freshly highlighted nonsense. They were trying to overwhelm me with paperwork theater, hoping I'd panic or fold under pressure, but they didn't understand who they were dealing with. As they spoke in circles, accusing me of restricting public access and violating unification bylaws, I realized something. This wasn't about a fence or a picnic or even power. The HOA wanted my land, my entire ranch, and Margaret was leading the charge with a personal vendetta disguised as civic duty. But I had something they didn't know about. Rock-solid evidence of their trespassing, impersonation, harassment, and illegal enforcement attempts. So when Margaret leaned closer and said, "This can go smoothly or it can get very messy for you," I calmly smiled and replied, "Great, because I've decided to get messy." The HOA didn't know it yet, but I was about to expose every lie, every fake badge, every abuse of power, and this standoff was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up to the kind of silence that feels wrong, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath, waiting for something ugly to happen. As I stepped out onto my driveway, my phone buzzed with 23 new messages from neighbors. Every one of them said the same thing: "Check your mailbox." My stomach tightened. I walked over, opened the metal door, and there it was, a thick, aggressively folded violation notice stamped in red. But this wasn't a regular HOA letter. This one was different. The paper even wasn't the standard HOA template. No watermark, no board signature, just a messy attempt to copy their format. At the bottom, a shaky scribble read, "Final warning, comply or face enforcement." Enforcement? For a broken sprinkler? For asking why the HOA was tracking homeowners? My mind immediately went back to Margaret storming off, to the fake officers, to the strange way the board had been hiding things. Something deeper was happening. And then, right as I was holding that paper in my hand, a white SUV with blacked-out windows rolled past my house at walking speed. It didn't speed up when I stared at it. It didn't pretend to be lost. It just crawled forward, slow and deliberate, as if the driver wanted me to see it. When it turned the corner, I finally exhaled, but before I could step back inside, my neighbor Ken rushed toward me waving his own letter. "Bro, look at this! This isn't even legal!" His notice accused him of having unauthorized gatherings in his backyard, even though Ken lived alone and rarely had visitors. Household after household stepped outside, each holding the same fraudulent notice, and right on cue, an emergency HOA meeting alert pinged all our phones. Mandatory attendance, 7 p.m. at the community clubhouse. That alone was suspicious. The HOA never held surprise mandatory meetings unless something massive was going down. All day long, neighbors whispered across fences, doors cracked open, blinds twitched. At 6:58 p.m., the clubhouse parking lot was overflowing, yet not a single board member was inside. Just one long folding table and a projector already running. The lights cut out, someone screamed, the projector flickered, casting a giant shadow against the wall. Tall, stiff, unmoving, a distorted voice crackled from a speaker. "All homeowners must comply with the updated enforcement policy. Violations will be addressed immediately." People looked around nervously. "Updated policy? When? Who voted on it?" someone shouted. No answer. The screen flashed to a slideshow of homeowners' houses, zoomed-in night photos taken from angles no normal passerby could capture. Ken grabbed my arm. "These pictures, they were taken from inside the yards." The room erupted in panic, and just as the chaos reached its peak, the doors slammed open. 3 individuals dressed in the same fake tactical uniforms from yesterday stepped inside, hands resting on their belts as if ready to detain someone. The leader pointed straight at me and said, "You, come with us." The entire room froze. My pulse hammered as every homeowner turned toward me, confused, terrified, waiting to see what would happen next. I took one step back, then another. The tallest officer cracked a grin beneath his fake badge and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "You should have stayed quiet."
The entire room fell silent as those fake officers closed in on me, their heavy boots thudding against the wooden floor in perfect synchronization. Too perfect, too rehearsed. Instinct kicked in, and I backed up toward the folding chairs, knocking one over as the crowd gasped. Ken stepped forward shouting, "You can't just take him! Who are you?" But the tallest officer raised a hand, almost amused, and replied, "We're the HOA's enforcement division. He's interfering with operations." Enforcement division? That wasn't real. Everyone knew the HOA had no such thing. Before I could respond, the shortest officer reached out and grabbed my wrist, cinching his fingers around it like he'd been waiting to snatch me all day. "Come quietly," he said, but his voice cracked, not with fear, but with struggle, as if he was trying to imitate authority and failing. The homeowners erupted, yelling, recording, demanding answers. "What operations? Why is he being detained? Where's the actual board?" The fake officers ignored everyone and forced me toward the exit. I resisted just enough to slow them down, but not enough to get myself hurt, because something about their uniforms, the mismatched stitching, the shiny, unscuffed boots, the cheap Velcro patches, told me they weren't trained. They were pretending to be something dangerous, pretending to scare us. But as they dragged me down the front steps of the clubhouse, I realized something far worse. Pretending didn't make them any less dangerous. A black van idled in the lot, side door already open, as if they expected to take me somewhere without questions. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my teeth. But right when they pushed me toward the van, a voice cut through the commotion. Sharp, furious, unmistakable. Margaret. She marched through the crowd like a storm in heels, face red, hair wild, clutching a thick binder stuffed with papers. "Stop right now!" she shouted, pointing at the men. "You're not HOA enforcement. You're not even hired security. You're frauds, and I have the documents to prove it." The officers hesitated for the first time. The leader let go of my shirt, jaw tightening. "You don't know what you're talking about," he growled. But Margaret wasn't backing down. She slapped the binder against the van, flipping it open to reveal contracts, bank statements, emails, all printed receipts of internal HOA decisions. The crowd surged closer as she yelled, "These men were hired illegally by the treasurer, using funds taken from homeowners' maintenance fees. They're not enforcement, they're intimidation." Gasps rippled across the parking lot. People started recording even faster now, phones held high. The officers looked at each other, suddenly unsure. The leader leaned toward Margaret, whispering something I couldn't hear, but she heard it and her face drained of color. Before she could react, he shoved her hard, sending her stumbling backward as the crowd screamed. That was the final spark. The homeowners lunged forward, swarming around me and Margaret, forming a protective barrier. The fake officers panicked, retreating to the van as people shouted, cursed, threw accusations. The van door slammed shut, the tires screeched, and they sped off into the darkness. For a few seconds, all we heard was the fading engine, then silence. Margaret clutched my arm, her eyes trembling with fear she had never shown before. "They're not done," she whispered. "This goes deeper than the HOA, and they're coming back tonight."
The moment Margaret said, "They're coming back tonight," a cold shiver shot down my spine. But she didn't give me time to react. She grabbed my wrist and pulled me toward her car, like someone dragging a friend away from a burning building. Homeowners crowded around us, shouting questions. "What do you mean deeper? Who hired them? Are we safe?" But Margaret kept repeating, "Not here, not now," as she ushered me into the passenger seat. The second the door shut, she locked them and exhaled shakily, like she had been holding her breath for hours. She flipped open her binder, hands trembling, revealing page after page of financial transfers, off-the-record meetings, strange invoices, and signatures that didn't match official records. "Listen carefully," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "This started months ago when the HOA president created a neighborhood integrity initiative.
supposedly to reduce crime, enforce maintenance standards, and protect property values. But the initiative wasn't approved by the board. It was never voted on. It wasn't legal. She pointed at a line item, $42,300, labeled enforcement equipment. Another, $19,500, labeled Community Operations Division. All of it paid out quietly with no receipts, no reports, no documentation. And then, she continued, flipping another page, these men started showing up. First just standing around the clubhouse, then giving warnings, then fines, then threats. Homeowners thought it was legit because the president told them it was. But it wasn't enforcement. It was a private paramilitary group hired to intimidate anyone who questioned her. My jaw tightened. It made too much sense. The uniforms that didn't match, the patches that weren't real, the fabricated authority. They weren't there to protect the community, they were there to control it. But why me? I asked. Why did they come after me specifically? Margaret leaned back, staring straight ahead at the darkening sky. Because you saw too much. You questioned them. You embarrassed them in front of homeowners. And you're the only one bold enough to stand up to the president publicly. She wants you silenced before more people wake up. Thunder rumbled far away, echoing over the rooftops like a warning. Margaret closed the binder, swallowing hard. And I'm not innocent in all this either. I helped organize the initiative at first, before I realized what it really was. And when I tried to back out, they threatened me too. She turned to me with wide, fearful eyes. But that isn't the worst part. She took a deep breath, then said something that made my stomach twist. They installed cameras around your ranch without your permission. My heart dropped. What? Hidden ones, she continued, in the trees, fence posts, even near the creek bed. They've been watching you for weeks, monitoring everything you do. They knew your routine, your schedule, the exact moment you'd be alone in that meeting tonight. My pulse hammered inside my skull. Why? What do they want from my ranch? Margaret hesitated, and then her voice cracked. Because the HOA president is planning to claim your land as community property next month. She wants to seize it, develop it, and profit from it, and she needs you out of the way to do it. My breath caught. My ranch, my family's land, targeted for takeover? But before I could speak, Margaret suddenly flinched and pointed past me through the windshield. Don't turn around, she whispered. They're here. They found us.
Margaret's voice turned hollow as she whispered, "Don't turn around. They're here." But my instincts didn't listen. My eyes flicked to the side mirror, and the sight made my chest freeze. A pair of headlights creeping slowly toward us. No engine rumble, no sound, like a predator stalking its prey. The same black van. I felt the air grow heavier as it rolled to a stop just a few yards behind Margaret's car. "They must have tracked your phone," she muttered, fumbling for her binder and shoving it onto my lap. "If anything happens, this is proof. Use it. Expose them. Don't let them win." Before I could answer, the van doors cracked open and two silhouettes stepped out, taller this time, bulkier, wearing darker gear, no mismatched stitching, no cheap patches. These weren't the same amateur actors from earlier. These were professionals, trained, silent. One of them approached Margaret's window, tapping the glass with something metal, sharp, deliberate, terrifying. "Step out of the vehicle," he said, his voice calm like someone asking for a pen, and that calm was worse than shouting. Margaret shook her head violently. "No, no, no!" She pressed a button, rolling the window down just an inch. "This is illegal! I have documents!" But she couldn't finish, because the man lifted something small and black and held it against the glass, some kind of jammer or remote device, causing the car's locks to chirp and disengage on their own. My stomach dropped as the doors clicked open by force. A full hijack. Margaret screamed, grabbing the steering wheel as the man yanked her door, but before he could pull it fully open, a blinding white flash erupted from behind us, followed by the loudest jolt of electricity I've ever heard. The man staggered back, convulsing for half a second, then hit the pavement. The second man spun around in panic, and that's when I saw where the flash came from. My ranch fence glowing in the distance. The electric fence I installed out of desperation the night before. Wired, powered, and now, thanks to the rain, conducting far beyond the perimeter.
The storm had turned the surrounding soil into a live trap, and the van was parked directly in the runoff path. Sparks crawled up its frame like lightning veins. The second man tried to retreat, but his boot touched a puddle connected to the charge, sending him collapsing next to the first. Margaret stared at me, stunned. "Your fence just saved us." But the danger wasn't over. The van began to smoke, its electronics frying, dashboard lights pulsing like a dying heartbeat. Homeowners from nearby streets rushed out, recording, shouting, calling 911. In minutes, the real police arrived, cuffing both men, still twitching, and securing the van. The HOA president, who had been watching from her window like some shadow queen, tried to sneak away, but the officers caught her after homeowners pointed her out. They found everything inside the van: forged enforcement badges, surveillance equipment, illegal contracts, and a tablet full of hidden camera feeds, all with timestamps proving weeks of illegal monitoring of my ranch. When the president was dragged out in handcuffs, she looked at me with pure venom. "This isn't over," she hissed. But she was wrong. Because it was over. The state took over the HOA, dissolved the board, seized their accounts, and launched an investigation that made headlines for weeks. My ranch was declared private property with zero HOA authority forever. And Margaret? Well, she quit the board and helped expose every corrupt member, officially becoming the unexpected hero of the community. As for me, well, I rebuilt my fence stronger, taller, and definitely more electric. Because after everything that happened, one thing was clear. No one, not even an HOA president with an ego bigger than her budget, was ever going to take my ranch again.